Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. What's the creepiest thing you've ever seen in your home? Please remember to like, share, hype, and subscribe. I got out of the shower and got dressed. Husband was on a work trip, kids were at school. On the kitchen counter was a half-empty can of Mountain Dew. I know 0 people that drink cans of Mountain Dew. My front door was unlocked, but I could find no one in the house. Laying in bed dead asleep when I hear a noise and a most raspy high-pitched voice calling out, "Mommy, Mommy!" And I wake just enough to see a tiny pale hand wrap around the corner by my bed. No head, no body, just a hand. So I start screaming. This thing starts screaming. My spouse wakes up to multiple screaming. Turns out my youngest had a nightmare and wanted cuddling, and I, instead of being Mother of the Year, thought some haunt was happening. ETA, I would like to add in my defense that my kids never called me Mommy. I'm Mama. I was so out of the blue and creepy AF, I regret nothing. Woke up with a start at 3:21. A small ball of light passed through my bathroom door, making it creak like someone opened it. It hung there like a bright marble for a few seconds, then slowly turned and vanished into my closet. At 4:32, after I had finally calmed down to fall back asleep, every light in my apartment turned on at once. Overhead, closet, nightstand, computer desk, kitchen above the sink. I sat bolt upright, heard a low-pitched but squeaky giggle. The lights all went out. I ended up getting and starting my day. All these flies used to crawl out from behind the washing machine, where I eventually looked to find hundreds of maggots, which I scooped up with a spade and chucked into our neighbor's garden. The flies would crawl out, and they were all disabled, so they could only crawl on the floor and up the walls. When they tried to crawl up the walls, they'd fall off and land on their backs just to spin around buzzing. There were hundreds and hundreds of flies just spinning on their backs, buzzing. I swept them into a corner where they all vibrated until they slowly died. Not at home, but at work. Aged care facility, and one resident had passed away only a few days ago in my area of responsibility. Important to note that the facility is impeccably maintained. Everything is perfect, and rooms are locked after a death until all items are cleaned by family, yet to be done. Yes, I had slept well prior to work, but 2 nights ago, night shift, the door handle to their room was rattling and trying to drop, as if someone was trying to open it. Every single time when I walked past. I got the master key and looked inside. All windows were tightly shut, all vents were closed, and no reason for such a thing to occur. It really creeped me out. I now despise patrolling that hallway. 3 people passed away recently and gives off weird vibes. In particular, walking past that very room, but I know what I saw and heard. All I can think of was the time I was weeding the front yard, and there was this one weed that had a huge, sprawling plant anchored in the middle by a single root. I started lifting this mat-like weed, and underneath it was a solid blanket of earwigs, like thousands of earwigs. I'm not afraid of bugs, but yeah, that was too many earwigs. I had just moved into my house about 8 years ago. It was just my dog and myself. I hadn't lived on my own for years, but felt very safe living in this little mountain town in Montana. It was dark outside, and I was on the couch reading a Reddit sub on my phone. People were sharing bad, scary experiences they'd had in their homes, a lot of home invasion stories and such. As I read the accounts, I felt a little smug, knowing that I didn't need to worry about a home invasion living where I did. That thought had barely left my brain when there was a tremendous bang at the front door, and the door violently swung open. I was frozen in fear for a second, imagining the absolute worst. Then in steps my neighbor's large Great Pyrenees dog. Apparently, I hadn't closed my door all the way, and the friendly dog had come to visit my dog and get a biscuit. His timing couldn't have been better. That, and a screw that flew horizontally between my friend and I as we were talking. It passed between us and then just dropped straight down. It was the same screw that I'd spent half an hour looking for after I dropped it while talking down a ceiling light. Someone climbing through my bedroom window. This happened almost a decade ago. It was a Tuesday afternoon and I was sleeping, and since it was my day off and I worked night shifts. Anyways, my dog, who was about 13-ish years old, who was mostly blind and deaf, was laying on my bedroom floor, and I thought someone was talking to her, but figured I was dreaming in my half-sleep state and went back to sleep. I woke up when I thought I heard it again, as well as wind, but realized I didn't have my window open. It was fairly dark in my room and I didn't have my contacts in, so I couldn't really see much except for a figure of someone crouched on the recliner I had by my window that my cat liked to use. I woke up and said, what the The guy stammered something about being his brother's friend and he must not be home, and jumped out of the window. I was still half asleep and texted my brother to tell his friends to use the door and not my window next time. Both my parents and my brother rushed home from work, but until they got there, my brother sent his one friend who lived nearby as well, and some others over to make sure I was okay. When his friend got there, the two small dogs that were in the living room barked like crazy at the friends that came to check on me, but didn't make a sound when the person was in my room. It took quite a few hours for me to realize what happened and what could have happened. At first, I was pissed off that I was woken up on my day off. There is now a bar across my childhood bedroom, and it's no longer possible to pump the screens out. I don't know, creepiest thing I've ever seen in my home. I had a carbon monoxide alarm go off at the time I was living in a house with another family on the other side of the house. And I guess it went off on their side. I was asleep downstairs. And at like 3 a.m. there's like banging on my front door. It was like, I thought I was getting, someone was breaking in. So at the time I had a shotgun and I like racked around. I was like, who is it? It was firefighters. So I think we kind of scared each other, but no shots were fired. And everyone's still here. So that was freaky though. Bye. A guy standing in my kitchen holding a butcher knife. I had a few friends over and one of those friends brought his friend. When everyone left, he came back and said he thinks he lost his wallet. I opened the door for him and immediately started looking between the couch cushions, and I turned around to see he wasn't in the room. I went into the kitchen, and he had the knife in one hand and his little friend Peter in the other hand. I ran into my kid's bedroom and shut and locked the door. He ended up leaving. One time I was outside with my ex. My dog started jumping and sniffing the air, barking and acting strange. We both got a weird vibe. When he walked into the house, his son was playing VR. He said, "I think we have a ghost." We both ran cold, saying, "What?" He said that it was showing someone in his safety bubble a few minutes ago. We all visibly got the creeps. Early 2000s, I lived in a 100-plus-year-old apartment. Would always hear strange noises like someone coming up the stairs but stopping at the end, then dead silence. Nobody was ever there. For seeing something, my mother kept saying she felt odd about her bedroom and hallway, so I put up a webcam in the hallway that had some motion alert that would audible alert through my PC speakers. Weeks go by and nothing. Then one day, when I was there alone, it went off. I looked at the monitor and saw a tall dark mass in the doorway to her bedroom. My room was right off the hallway too, so I tiptoed over and cracked my door open, and I saw it with my own eyes, a very tall, solid, dark mass. It looked about 1 foot off the floor. Wasn't human-shaped exactly, just like a lean, tall shape of darkness. Felt like 10 minutes passed while I was staring at it, but it was only a few seconds. It moved quickly to the right and out of view. I gathered my guts and walked to the door and looked into the room. Nothing was there. I'll never forget that experience. Came home from a late shift at 1 a.m., switched on the light. There was a guy sleeping on the sofa. I just so managed to suppress screaming to not wake him up, leaving and calling the police. Turns out he was a drunk neighbor who lived 1 floor above me. Our landlord had saved money by using the same lock and key for every single unit. Neighbor was too drunk to remember how many stairs he went up and thought my apartment was his. He said he thought the couch felt weird, but since his key had opened the door, he had no doubts. Back in high school, I was streaming a show on my laptop while sitting in the basement of our house. After feeling something touch me, I looked over to see the biggest spider I've ever seen to this day sitting on my shoulder. Freaked out, and my first instinct was to rip off my shirt and run upstairs topless while screaming. Needless to say, my mom was very confused. I didn't hang out in our basement for at least 2 years after that. Still gives me the shivers to think about. The remnants of the murder that occurred in my kitchen prior to me moving in. The man was shot by a neighbor through the window while doing his dishes and listening to music. There's chipped tile and holes in my fridge from the shotgun pellets dispensing. My kitchen is also poorly renovated, as I imagine much if it was very damaged by the gunfire. Along with the blood, it's both creepy and sad, and I try not to think about it too much. The Blue Mother. Still don't understand it to this day, and when I tell my family about it, they just laugh it off. Around maybe 8 or 9 years old, we were living in my great-great-aunt's house, which creeped me out because I knew she had died in the den, and I had already had a few strange experiences from the duplex we moved from at the time. The way the house was set up was like one long hallway that connected the den, kitchen, dining room, living room, and all the bedrooms, and a bathroom in the back of the house. Aside from the living room, you basically could see or walk through each space until you got to the bedrooms. My mom had set up the family computer in that corner that lined up with the view of the hallway. Now, at the time, we were really struggling for money, and my mom often had to leave me home alone for about 30 minutes to an hour at a time until she could finish her shift. Thankfully, by that point, we had been living there for at least a year, and I was finally comfortable in the house so long as I had music playing. I even started to look forward to being home alone at the time since I could just play my music and games in peace. One day I walked in after school and it felt odd. It was like the house was dead, yet at the same time it felt like someone was there. I shouted to see if anyone was there because sometimes she would be off in time, but she didn't respond. I ended up playing music and games at the computer, but I kept feeling odd. Eventually, I had an overwhelming feeling that I was being watched, so I swung around in the chair only to meet eyes with my mom. Some of you might have heard of the always clothed, naked mom talk from a while back that was going around TikTok. I grew up with a naked mom. When I turned around, I saw my mom fully nude, but that wasn't new to me. What was odd, though, was that she looked blue, and the back half of the house looked darker than usual. Even with the lights off and the windows blocked off, it didn't get that dark usually. Everything just looked cold. I remember locking eyes and we just started staring at each other for what was probably a good 30 seconds to a minute before I got that overwhelming feeling in my back that I needed to turn around again. I ended up turning the music down a little in case I was disturbing her sleep or something, but just felt off for about 20 minutes, when all of a sudden I hear the back door in the den about 15 feet away from me unlock. I immediately look over, only to see my mom walking in the house, key in the lock, carrying some groceries in. I'm looking at her terrified and confused at the point because I know I just saw her in the back of the house in her birthday suit, staring me down. I asked her if she had used the front door earlier, but notice she's also in her work clothes. She says no, she just came from work. We also never use the front door unless there's a party. At that point, I ask if she's pranking me, and my mom lies a lot, but damn, she's a bad liar. She says no, and I know she's not lying. She wasn't there. I know I saw a blue version of her, but that it wasn't her. Years later, maybe sophomore year of college, I'm talking to my sister. She's older than me, and she's also a lot more of a spiritual, witchy person. She said she had seen the same thing in that house. While we haven't seen that exact thing since living there, we have also concluded that there is something that follows our mother because the same kind of energy we got from these experiences continued to follow her from house to house. I lived in a basement apartment. In the corner of the living room was a water meter, which had a little glowing light on it that cast a dim light up the wall when the lights were off. Never had a problem with spiders, but one night at 1 a.m. I got up to use the bathroom and I looked into the living room, and descending from the ceiling, bathed in that light, was a spider the size of my hand, creeping down and down and down and disappeared behind the water meter. I didn't go in the living room for 2 days after that. Eventually, I got the courage to go search for it, but it was never found. One night, when I was a young kid, I was laying in bed, staring out into the hallway. After a while, I saw this really tall, 7 feet figure start to slowly walk from the left side of the hallway, dead end to the right. It was glowing white and had a triangle-shaped head, spy versus spy style, but a normal humanoid body. Absolutely terrified me. I quickly rolled over and put my blankets over my head. After a while, I looked again and it was gone. I've also seen a kind of short shadow man wearing a bowler hat standing in the middle of my living room in the dead of night as a kid, but he didn't even startle me. He just appeared for a second and disappeared when I blinked. I was more confused than anything. Not seen, but a month or so ago, I was walking to bed and a doll I had never seen before turned on to yawn and say, "Good night." Little disclaimer, my ex's daughters moved away last year, followed by my ex. My house is still full of a bunch of toys and clothes and no room to move things around and organize them to give or throw away. The doll was in a box full of dolls, but I had never seen or heard this doll before. Had those girls found it, I absolutely would have recognized it as soon as I heard it. That part isn't too weird, but the fact that it said goodnight to me was. The switch is recessed and took me a lot of effort to acutely manually, and I've got fairly strong hands. It's not a button, it's an on-off switch. When I pulled it out of the box, it was off. My kid at the time, he was about 4, got a bloody nose in his sleep and he got up and tried to find the light switch and left bloody handprints all along the wall. Then he finally found the switch and turned it on and got frightened by the bloody handprints that were his own. But he started screaming and I came running down the hall in my pajamas at 2 a.m. and then I saw the handprints and I started screaming. Poor husband came stumbling down a few minutes later and was like, "What the guys?" I have 2 stories that happened to me about 20 years ago. My parents were divorcing and the atmosphere in the house was not the best you could imagine. There were constant fights and aggression. Both events happened when I was around 9 or 10, so I don't remember which happened first. My father was since the early days of the 80s in IT, and so I learned pretty much everything I knew at the time from him. And I was a bit ahead of tech knowledge for my age and that time. He had his bureau in the basement of the house. It was a big and brand new 4-floor house. He always left for work and came only after 5 p.m., so the bureau was never really used by him or anyone else, and was my test ground at that time. That day, as usual, everyone else was on the other floors, and I was on the computer looking up weird sites. I just saying roten like sites should ring some bells to some of you. And I swear, out of nowhere I hear this indescribable demonic growl mixed with a light laugh right next to my right ear. It was not subtle or faint at all, and I'm 100% deaf on the right side, but I clearly felt the sound vibration against my skull and small wind against my ear like when someone whispers. There were no windows at all, as it was underground, and the walls were thick, not a U.S. house, but a well-isolated, thick, new, and modern Swiss house. There was no sound enabled on the computer, no video playing in the background either, and I know and can distinguish when the sound comes from the screen stereo, as I hear perfectly fine from the other ear. It was such a sudden and strange growl that I can imitate it more or less if someone asks me, but I absolutely can't describe it in words. My brain instantly understood, and man, I never moved so fast in my life as that day. If there was a day where I could have beaten Usain Bolt, it was this one. Took me months to go down there again and feel safe, but I never actually did after that. Always looked around and was like not focused on the computer, only to be ready in case something strange happened again. The nannies we had at the time also reported strange sights, and my little brother, he was 6 at the time, once came down from the 4th floor crying and panicking as he saw the big black guy entering one of the little doors where the toys were stored. The whole 4th floor was our playroom and had 2 of these little storefronts each on a side of the room, except they didn't lead anywhere and had only toys stored in them. The second strange event happened to both of us. We were sleeping and suddenly we hear a bell in the middle of our room. The sound was so clear and both of us heard it. First time it didn't bother us much as we just thought it might be a toy or something that was left in our room. Well, that bell began to ring every night from this day on forward and always at the same time. Strange was also whenever it rang, both of us awakened suddenly without fail, fatigue, or anything. Just straight up awake in the middle of the night. My mother and grandmother heard it too after they decided to sleep with us to check on it. We never discovered what it was. Even after taking everything out and leaving only our 2 mattresses in the room, it continued. My grandmother, who is heavily religious, began to pray every night before the bell hour came, and after several months it vanished only to reappear several months later on the new apartment that we moved after the divorce of our parents. It was 200 kilometers away from where we lived before. Again, this time it vanished after heavy repeated prayer, and thankfully it never came back. I write this as the years passed. I contemplated all possibilities of external influence, like I said, sound coming from my computer, exterior, etc. But the neighbor's house were not collated together, and you could not play this kind of prank in the 90s to several people and on a constant basis, like the episode of The Bell. If you could it hidden something, well, but we took out everything, and the sound always came from the middle of the room, and continued after moving to the anchor state. I'm having the chills just remembering this period of my life. Paranormal or not, it was either way really a dense moment for everyone. I just moved into our new apartment, and my boyfriend stayed behind in the old one to pay rent until the lease expired, so for 6 months I was on my own. It was a nice apartment on the edge of a nice town, and my first time completely living alone. This apartment was a rectangle with a long hallway connecting everything. I moved in and the pandemic started more or less immediately, so I was very much alone, and that was exhilarating but creepy. One night I woke up to loud scratching coming from the front doorway at the end of the hallway. I remember waking up and realizing it was 3:30 and I was a young woman alone in an apartment and someone was trying to break in. I crept down the hallway and yelled, "I have a gun!" and the scratching stopped. I've never owned a gun. Then it started again from the kitchen. I realized the scratching was from my cabinets, and I recognized the sound of a small rodent. After walking around, I isolated it to the cabinet above the fridge. Long story short, a squirrel made its way in through an air duct or whatever, it's been a few years, and in the wall behind my cabinets. I called maintenance and they came and removed the squirrel and replaced the mesh to keep him out of the area. Had no other license after that. The maintenance guy felt awful when I recounted my experience and thought it was someone breaking in, and reassured me that it was a very safe neighborhood. I was asleep in the front room, then I hear white noise, how the old TV sounds staticky with that white screen. I wake up and front steps away is a transparent dark figure, almost sticky looking. It takes about a second and boom, he was on top of me. I couldn't yell or scream, only frozen. Then it got off me. End of story. Next day I told my lady and she said her brothers have told her the same story over the years. Supposedly a curse from the owner before. Months later, from Rosemead where it happened, it showed up in my rearview mirror in Glendale at work on my break. Already knew it was by the static noise. I feel it was a little reminder that they didn't forget about me. Hasn't happened again, but if I hear that static sound with no TV around, it's not a good sign. This was many moons ago. That was my ex-wife's crib. My son still lived there. Haven't broke it to him yet. Man, I'm not sure what they're called. I keep getting these weird bugs with a million legs in my house. They seem to be in the damp areas of my house, like the cellar or kitchen sink, kitchen counter, or just the kitchen in general. And some of them are pretty large, like 1¼ inches long. All I know is when one runs across my kitchen floor when I'm cooking, I know it. I knock it to the floor and mash it barefoot. I don't even hesitate. These things give me the creeps, lol.